Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Career Climb. I'm just so happy that you're here. If this is your first time watching, The Career Climb is where we spark conversations with executives and industry leaders, and they share their perspectives on leadership and workplace culture through real life cases and not theory. Tonight, I am flying solo yet again. I'm excited to talk directly with y'all. But if this is the first time you're seeing my face, I'm Julia Rock. I'm your host this evening, and I'm the founder and CEO at Rock Career Development. And we are a Houston-based consulting firm that helps organizations to retain their best talent and get the best out of them through leadership development solutions. So, we know that people often don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And so we're on a mission to make bosses better. That's simply put. But I'm excited that you're here. If you want to catch up on this episode and all past episodes of The Career Climb, you can connect with me right here on LinkedIn, or you can head to our YouTube channel. You can go to rockcareer.com/CC archive, and that will take you directly to the archive where all of the episodes are listed. And I would love for you guys to stay connected with us in the chat. Would love for you to drop where you're watching from, what resonates with you in tonight's conversation. Just want to keep the dialogue going. I'm a very energetic and active person, and I would love to get a little bit of that energy back in the chat tonight. And so, without further ado, I want to get into tonight's topic, and it's really around the idea of whether or not leaders can be cowards and what that looks like. And if you have followed me on social media at any point, I don't mince words. So we're just gonna hop into it because I have a Substack. So shameless plug. I write on Substack on a daily basis. So you can head to leaduncomplicated.com and subscribe to my Substack. But I was writing about this the other day around seeing certain cowardice in the workplace when I reflect on my own corporate career. One of the biggest things that I would see is that there were leaders that I truly, truly respected. And I saw them start to cower to leaders that were more senior. Even if that more senior leader was wrong, they would cower to that person instead of holding them accountable. And what I want tonight's conversation to be about is what happens when leaders don't display courage and instead display cowardice. And you can display courage in a number of ways, right? It's easy to talk about courage in the sense of standing up for your people, right? You want to advocate on their behalf. You want to ask for them to get more resources or what have you. So those are, that's a situation where you can think about, think about being courageous or brave. But what are the other ways that leaders can either display courage or cowardice? And so going back to the point I made around seeing these leaders cower to other senior leaders, knowing that they were wrong, that's where I struggle, because I don't think we talk about cowardice in that space enough. And I'm not going to use flowery language where it's like, well, they have difference of opinion. It's cowardice. If you can't hold someone accountable, even when you know they're wrong, that means that you are not maintaining your own integrity, and that's cowardice. And what I would see often, I'm just going to share just different things that I saw in my career. One, if there were senior leaders who were talking poorly about other employees and or people who are below them, you would see leaders just not speaking up in those settings. And this was especially early in my career when I was an analyst, right? And I just happened, because of a role I was in senior conversations just because of the data that I had to present. And, at that time, I wasn't necessarily the most comfortable saying things, but I would think that the bosses above me would be willing to hold someone accountable if they're hearing a person being badmouth or a group of employees being badmouth. And that didn't happen. And so that for me was odd. And one of the other things that I saw was, particular situations where we would have to, what's the right word here? Sanitize certain information. We'd have to sanitize certain information, make the deck, the PowerPoint deck or the PDF or whatever it is more palatable, because the leader above me, above my team, they were afraid, for lack of a better word, or they had indigestion around how a senior leader, leader A or B, would take the information if it was given to them bluntly. And I remember sitting back, I can look back at these things now, and, when you're in it, you don't do any sort of analysis, right? You're just trying to figure out what's going on and get things done. But, I look back now and I ask myself, why was it that these leaders were so afraid of pushing back or speaking up? And that takes a certain level of courage. And on the flip side of that, I think about the leaders on the other side. So this may be for you, thinking about, are you a leader that's open to feedback? Because that's also a place for courage. That is a place for bravery. Because if you can only dish out criticisms, constructive criticism though it may be, if you can only dish out feedback, if you can only do that, but you can't accept it, that's problematic as a leader. Because that means if you're not willing to take any feedback, if you're not willing to take any insights or any perspective, that means that you think that you've made it, you've arrived, you're perfect, and other people just need to get on board. And we all know that that's just not true, because the idea is none of us, nobody, no one who's watching this tonight is perfect. We all have our faults. We all have our flaws. We all make mistakes. And so that means we should be open to having people call us out as appropriate, to make sure that we continue to develop as leaders. I don't care if you're an executive and you've been a C-suite executive for 30 years, you're not always going to get it right. And if you are not open to feedback, that means you leave yourself open to getting more and more things not right, because you're not willing to hear the voices of people around you. You're not willing to take perspective and insights. You just think that, hey, I know what I'm doing because I've been doing this for 30 years. And so other people just have to adapt to my vision. They have to adapt to what I'm saying. But the problem with that is when you are closed off to feedback, again, you are limiting your own growth. We can't see our own blind spots. That's why they're blind spots. We can't see those things. And so it's up to us as leaders to be open to feedback. And so that's really my question for you as a leader right now. Just take a moment wherever you're sitting and just think about, am I open to feedback? And you may be thinking, well, absolutely, I'm open to feedback for sure. If my employees need to tell me something, I'm open to it. That's probably your knee-jerk reaction. We all think that we're super approachable and that anyone can come and talk to us. But I have to think about all those leaders that I saw in corporate who were afraid to go back to leader A or leader B. Those leaders, the leader A and leader B, they probably thought they were approachable too, but there was something that they were driving that created fear in the hearts of the leaders that I was looking up to. There was something that was driving some level of trepidation into their hearts and into their minds, so they didn't want to push back. And so as you're thinking about, hey, am I a leader who's open to feedback? I want you to think about, how have you solicited feedback, or have you ever solicited feedback from your team? And it's one thing to just say, hey guys, how are things going? That's not requesting feedback for real. That's a pulse check. And there's a difference between a general pulse check just to see what's happening, and asking for direct and specific feedback on the level of support and development that you're providing to the team, the level of direction and guidance, the way that you have set expectations. It's very different to ask for feedback on that versus a general, well, how are things? How are things going? And I want to talk about the idea behind feedback. It doesn't always have to be some sort of 360 survey, right? Because we always go from, from one side of the, swinging the pendulum one way all the way to another extreme. It's either we ask a general question or we think we have to have, a 100 question survey. There's no in between. But in practice, if you are a leader that is courageous and you want feedback from your employees, it is possible for you to ask the questions, creating the space for your employees to give you feedback. That could be in one-on-one sessions, so with your direct reports, getting that feedback. It can be in team meetings that you have. Because often when we go into these team meetings as leaders, we want this super crisp agenda and we're going to tap through all the projects and we're going to be, we're going to be on it. But often we don't hold enough space in those settings when we have our entire team together to get insights. Because often people complain about doing one-on-ones. Oh, I don't have time for that. It's so time consuming. One, I disagree with that. But let's just say for the sake of the story that you really don't have time for individual meetings. You must have time to talk to your team as a group, I would hope. So if you have even if you're at an executive level, you have time to talk to your direct reports. And so the idea that there is no time on the calendar, there's no opportunity, that's just not true. And you have to ask yourself, if you don't have time to talk to the people that report to you, what do you have time for? If there are people who are working for you who need your guidance, they need your direction, they need your insights to drive the objectives of the organization forward. If you don't have time to talk to those people, what are you doing with your full day? What are you doing with your full day? Because your job, first and foremost, as a leader, is to lead people. And sure, your desk is full. You have meetings, you have board members, so you may have external partners, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, if you are in any type of leadership position, your commitment should be to your people. But let me get off my soapbox, because I can go down the one-on-one and the team meeting track quite a bit. But the idea is, when you have the opportunity to hold space, you should. So in that team meeting setting, after you've gotten the project updates, holding time in the calendar to ask more direct questions about, hey guys, would love to get your feedback on how you think so-and-so is going. How do you think I've supported you on this project? How do you think I've supported you during this transition to A or B? Asking very specific questions so that you can get specific and actionable feedback. Because just asking, how am I doing? It's broad, right? People are going to say, I guess you're doing fine. Thanks. But if there's context that you can put around it, like, hey, I'm seeking to be a better leader to you all. And I know that we've had, this level of change in the organization. I know that we've had this other thing going on. We had these 2 new projects that came on. I know that there have been a lot of moving parts. And I would really like to understand how I've been supporting you in this change. How do you feel about that? Is there something else that I can do to help you be more successful, or to help you feel like you're moving forward, whatever it might be? But making sure you're holding space in those conversations for people to give you honest feedback. Because here's the other thing that I've seen, and I've seen this even with employee engagement surveys, is that we ask leading questions. When we're asking for feedback, it's like, so things have been going well, you would say, right? And everyone's going to be like, yeah, things are going fine. And so you have to make sure that you're not trying to lead people to the answer you want. You want honest, direct feedback. If you're going to color the brush, right, with whatever color you want, what's the point of asking? And so I wanted to really make sure I spent some time on requesting feedback. And again, it doesn't have to be some long, drawn out survey. Whatever settings you have, if you do team building, I'm not a fan of big team building events because I feel like they're forced fun unnecessarily. But let's say you're into that kind of thing. You can also use those moments when you have some downtime in between the activities to ask for some feedback, ask general questions since you have the whole team together. Use the opportunities that you have available to ask for feedback. Now, here's one of the other challenges, though, that I also want to get to. Many of us struggle with accepting bad news. Many of us struggle with accepting bad news, no matter what kind of bad news it is, even if it's not directed at us specifically. We often struggle with bad news. So if a mistake happens, the sky is falling, where everything is collapsing, and often it's just not that serious. Sure, there are situations where it's truly dire, reputational risk, financial risk, sure, there are those kinds of situations. But most often when we are flying off the handle, it's not something that couldn't be rectified. I will never forget a scenario where I had gone on a business trip to Europe, and while I was away, one of the analysts on my team called me to share with me one of the issues that had popped up with some of the financial reporting that was going on. And the analyst lined out what happened, explained what went on. And then I asked, well, have we fixed it? And what do you need? And they said, no, well, these are the action steps and so forth. And I said, hey, those sound good. Let me know what the status is. And I remember the analyst being like, well, wait a minute, is that it? And I said, well, yeah. And he's like, we were kind of trying to draw straws as to who would have to call you about this because none of us wanted to be the one to have to say anything because nobody wants to report on the bad news, just generally. But I said, what's the point of me being upset and flying off the handle if it's something we've identified, if it's something that we know how to fix going forward and we already have a solution? You guys are doing what you're supposed to do. I don't expect you all to be perfect, but I do expect if something comes up, if there's a mistake that we find a solution. We have. I'm happy about that. Go forth and prosper, right? And just keep me posted because making your team feel bad about themselves after a mistake has already happened, it doesn't do anything to solve the problem any faster. It just demoralizes people and it creates an environment where your people feel like they need to walk on eggshells and speak in hushed tones because you can't take bad news. And so, they're not comfortable letting you know what they're seeing or what they're experiencing, and they're hiding the mistakes and they're hiding the bad news. And so I want you to think about, even if you say that you're open to feedback, like, yes, I can take feedback, they should just tell me. Think about how you handle bad news. Think about whether or not your team can come to you with something that went wrong and that you are open to fully listening and you're open to not flying off the handle. You're willing to hear them out and not lose it. And I will say we all have had a moment where we've lost it, we've been frustrated. It happens to everyone because we're human beings. But by and large, are you a person that can handle bad news in a level-headed fashion? Because that will then inform how comfortable your employees are in giving you feedback. Because if they see you fly off the handle for every little thing, if you then ask them, hey guys, what kind of support are you receiving from this? How do you guys feel about the support you're getting from me? If that in and you can't take bad news, everyone's going to struggle with what to say in those settings. People are going to feel uncomfortable speaking up because they're going to say, well, wait a minute. I don't want to get in trouble in some way. I don't want to be called out in some way. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And so again, no one's telling you what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And then when people put in their 2 weeks notice, you're surprised. You're like, wait, what happened? I thought things were going well. Well, no, people were just afraid to tell you anything. And one of the things that I want to talk through here as well is If you want your team to grow, if you want your team to take initiative, if you want your team to be willing to hold each other accountable, you have to lead by example. It can't be that you're willing to hold their feet to the fire and let them know, hey, this didn't go well. We need to work harder on this. We need to do X, Y, and Z. You can't do that. And then when the time comes for you to be held accountable, that you're flying off the handle, they feel like they have to walk on eggshells, all of that. So I want you to just take a moment to digest that a little bit, to think about, am I setting an example? That's where courage is important, because if you demonstrate courage, it then empowers your people and emboldens them to say, hey, I can be courageous. I can hold my peers accountable. I can hold myself accountable. All of that starts with you. And again, sure, there are things you're supposed to learn outside of the office, and we're all supposed to come in with our own perspectives. But leaders set the tone, they set the temperature in an organization. So if you create a culture of healthy feedback, if you create a culture where holding people accountable is expected, if you create a culture where you can be vulnerable and real and talk about the fact that, hey, I know that I'm not always going to get it right, and I want you guys to hold me accountable. If you set that tone and you create that culture, now it's more likely for people to do the same, your team to do the same, for them to feel open with sharing and to share more of their ideas with you, share more of their feedback with you, and ways to improve, so that the overall team does better and that they develop. What you don't want is that you limit their development because, you're beating down on them for the mistakes that they're making, and then you're not even holding yourself accountable. And then they end up in other teams and they're progressing throughout their career and they're still not where they need to be. They're not open to receiving feedback, and they're undercutting their own performance and their own career by not being open to feedback. Thinking back on my own career, sitting in whether it was team meetings or it was one-on-ones, and asking, how is this going? In terms from your perspective on so and so project, do you feel like you are getting the right level of support from me? And if not, what is the specific thing that you would like for me to do? And I've been given clear feedback. And I'm not a person who gets offended by much. It's the Brownsville thing. But I was willing to hear from them what I was doing wrong in their opinion, what they thought that I was, in terms of what I was not delivering on their behalf, what level of support I was not providing. And so those were things that I was able to take and then improve. I'll give you another example. So since we talk about real things here, it's not just theory and ideas. Just looking at another case in my career where some of my employees thought that I hadn't stood up to my boss as much as they would have preferred on a particular issue. They said, "Hey, we thought you would have pushed back harder on that." And so, we weren't comfortable seeing the fact that you really didn't push back enough in that conversation. And I had to own that. I wasn't going to complain and fly off the handle and get defensive. I was able to take that feedback and say and reflect on, how did I perform in this situation? Because sometimes we have our own lens as to how we're doing things. We're only seeing what we're seeing. When we get that external feedback, we can now go back to the situation with a different perspective and say, you know what, actually, I didn't stand up to her the way that I should have. That's my fault. That's on me. I'm going to do better. And I committed to my team that, you know what, if you don't feel like I had your back in this situation, that is on me. And I took that feedback, and we, other situations arose where my boss and I kind of bumped heads a little bit, and they came back and they said, you know what, Julia, we have seen a difference with how you handle situations with her. And for me, that was affirming, right? That taking the feedback and actioning on it. And then it was just good for myself and my own growth as to where there may not have been enough strength in certain situations. Because I'm always somebody who does my best to advocate for my team, stand up to them. But if in a situation I didn't do what I was supposed to, call me out. Call me out. I didn't take offense. It was about how do I get better to make sure I'm the best leader I can be for you. And I think that that's the takeaway from tonight's conversation as we start to wind it down, thinking about what do you have to do to be the best leader possible for your team? And that means being uncomfortable. That means being vulnerable. That means having the courage to ask, what am I doing wrong, or where am I missing something? Where are my gaps? So however you want to phrase the conversation with the people who work for you, you need to be comfortable enough to let them respond and give you insights and hold you accountable. You cannot lead effectively if you are not being held accountable. That breeds, that breeds lawlessness, for lack of a better word, right? When you're not governed and you can just do whatever you want, then you don't have a commitment in one way or the other. That breeds lawlessness, indecisiveness, inefficiency, you name it. And so part of you being a courageous leader means that you're willing to be held accountable. And one of the things that I would say is when you look around your team and you see all those people who are performing at their highest, they're performing at their best, they're committed to the work that they're doing, and they're showing up for you every day, do you not owe it to them as well to show up for them in the most effective way possible, in your best way? Because you're holding them to a high standard. You want them to hit all their targets and the KPIs, and you want them to do the things. You want them to do the things. And so if they're willing to be held to that standard, if they're willing to show up every day and meet and exceed your expectations, do you not think you owe them the same? Even if it means that it ruffles your feathers a bit. Maybe it hurts your pride somewhat. Maybe you're just uncomfortable. Maybe it causes you to do some additional self-reflection. Who knows? But isn't it worth it to give that to your organization, knowing how they're showing up for you? And then you have to think about it this way. You never know who you may work alongside. There may be somebody who's working for you today who you're working alongside tomorrow, or that you end up working for. And so don't you want to set the right tone with those individuals so that as they develop in their leadership career, that they're able to take and model that good behavior as they step up the ladder? And so I want you to think about that as we wrap up tonight's conversation. Are you open to feedback, or are you a coward? And going back to the conversation at the very beginning, courage as a leader can show up in a number of different ways. One, are you willing to hold other people accountable who don't report to you, people who are above you? Are you willing to hold them accountable? Are you willing to, do you have the integrity to say, hey, this isn't correct? And you can always, you want to make sure that you're professional at all times, but making sure that you're holding other people accountable. But more importantly, that you're holding yourself accountable and you're allowing your team to do the same. And so with that, I want to wrap up tonight's conversation. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad that I was able to share tonight. I am going on vacation, so I will be taking a 2-week break, and we will be back in September. I will be traveling, so please make sure to stay tuned for the September. We've got a great slate of guests for September and beyond to have more of these conversations with leaders. As I said at the beginning, people don't quit their jobs. They quit their bosses most often. And so what we want to drive through all of the career climb conversations, all of the practical insights in the cases, is for the leaders who watch to be able to do the reflection and do the work needed so they can be the most effective in their seats, so they can retain their talent and build healthier teams or healthier work cultures and stronger teams. And so thank you guys so much for watching. If you had a question that we didn't get to tonight about how to lead with courage, about how to make sure that you're being held accountable, this is what I coach all of my executives and leaders on that's a development area for them. So if you have questions about how to do that, or you know that you're in need of that support, please feel free to connect with me right here on LinkedIn. You don't have to drop a comment because you may not want other people to see it and put yourself on blast. I get that. So please feel free to send me a DM, or you can email me at hello@rockcareer.com. Again, that email is hello@rockcareer.com. And also, one more time, so I have a LinkedIn newsletter. So I would love for you to subscribe. It's called The Uncomplicated Leader. So that is published weekly. If you want more content from me, as I said at the very beginning, I post daily on Substack. And so you can head to leaduncomplicated.com and you can subscribe to the Substack there. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you guys in September.